As many of you probably know, Resident Evil is literally my favorite game franchise of all time. So today I figured, why don't we go ahead and rank every single Resident Evil game? So to kind of give you guys an idea of how the tiers are going to work, we have S, which is like the best of the best. A, which is, you know, it's a good game. B, it's an okay game. It's something I'd play again. C, I could go the rest of my life and not play it and I'd be fine. However, if somebody asked me to play it again, I'd totally be okay with doing so. And then F is, please get away from me. And also, before we get into this, I'm going to try to fly through this as quick as we can. Like, I'm not going to linger on one game for too long because we have a lot of games to go through. So first up, we have the original Resident Evil. However, I don't know which Resident Evil this is referring to. This could be the DualShock version. This could be vanilla. I don't know if I'm allowed to play the sound clip in this video without getting copyright striked, but if it is the DualShock version and it has that soundtrack, oh good lord. All in all, I'll give it an A. However, if we're talking about the DualShock version, I might have to drop it down to a B just due to that soundtrack, but if it's going off of vanilla, I'll leave it in an A, especially considering it's the one that started it all. I'm really tempted to put it in S because I do love the original Resident Evil, but compared to the other ones that are going to be going in the S tier, I don't know, this is really hard. I might re-rank it later, but for now, I think I'll leave it in an A. Resident Evil 2 is immediately gonna go into the S tier. This was one of the first Resident Evil games that I truly, like, fell in love with. There's just something about Resident Evil 2, every time I go to replay it, it pulls me back in immediately. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that Leon is my favorite Resident Evil protagonist. But from the opening moments in the streets of Raccoon City up until you get to the police department and just the game as a whole, it's absolutely amazing. Atmosphere, puzzles, level design, bosses, I love Resident Evil 2. It's so nostalgic for me. I love the game. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. You know what? I think that also deserves to go in the S tier. Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, I played both of them at pretty similar times back in the day, so I look at both of them quite fondly. I definitely like Resident Evil 2 a bit more than 3. However, 3 is still absolutely amazing, and I do believe that it deserves the S tier, especially with the innovations that it made with the branching paths throughout the story. You can either choose to fight Nemesis or choose not to fight him, and then there's some other ones that I won't spoil just in case anybody hasn't played the game, but they have like genuine consequences and genuine outcomes that impact the story as a whole. And plus, I'm a sucker for the classic RE games with the fixed camera perspectives and the polygonal PS1 graphics. I love it. And while I'm thinking of it, I'm gonna assume that this one is referring to vanilla RE, so you know what? This one deserves the S tier. Who am I kidding? It deserves the S tier. Resident Evil Code Veronica X, don't even play with me. This is going straight into the S tier. I really hope that this game is next to get remade. It is just chef's kiss. It's the classic RE style of game with the fixed camera perspectives and item/ammo management. However, it was on more powerful hardware like the Dreamcast and the PS2. It's literally just classic RE, just with like, I guess, better graphics, more polygons, and it's amazing. I also love the dynamic of getting to play as multiple characters throughout the story in this one. All in all, it's an absolutely phenomenal game, and it's a shame that not as many people have played it. I mean, it makes sense considering it's kind of hard to get your hands on it nowadays. I mean, it's not necessarily hard, not as hard as some of the other ones we'll be going over, but you know, it's not as readily accessible on modern hardware. There hasn't really been any official remasters or ports since the PS3 and 360 generation. Regardless, if you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. Resident Evil Survivor. I think it deserves the C. I mean, I don't know. This game, it's not bad, but, I mean, because if it was bad, it would be going in the F tier. But, you know, it's okay. It's not one that I'm rushing to replay, if I'm going to be 100% honest, but it's still an okay game. Like, it's still fun. The same can honestly be said for its sequel. Like, they're good games. I enjoy them. They're not ones that I'm, like, rushing to return to, but, like, if I were to binge the entire series down the line, they're games that I would play and thoroughly enjoy. It's just, they just don't really stack up among some of my favorites, if I'm going to be honest. Resident Evil Gaiden. Oh my gosh. I kind of want to put this in a B. I mean, even though sometimes the backtracking is a little egregious even for Resident Evil standards, it was still just such an ambitious port, and I honestly had a lot of fun with it. Could I put it in the A tier? I don't know if I'd necessarily put it in A tier among some of the other ones that are going to be going there, but I think that it sits well at a B. Resident Evil Remake. S tier. Do I need to say any more? It took an already phenomenal and classic game and just made the graphics look a bit better while still keeping the game looking disgusting and horrifying. I absolutely love the Resident Evil Remake. That initial reveal when you see the zombie for the first time will always be one of my favorite moments in gaming, period. Not to mention all the other additions that this game brought to the table with Lisa Trevor and all that. I had played the original Resident Evil before the remake, so once I got to that point and there was like new enemies and new bosses and stuff, it completely blew my mind. Absolutely amazing game game. And this one is more like easily accessible. So if you're on a PS4, Xbox One, there is native ports to those consoles. Please give it a shot. Resident Evil 0, you know, this is, it's a good game. I like it. I don't really feel like it was necessarily necessary in the canon or the story of Resident Evil. Am I glad it exists? Yes, because it had a lot of innovative ideas, namely like the whole co-op mechanic. It's not necessarily co-op, but you can basically like switch between the characters. There was some aspects of the story that kind of had me scratching my head wondering if it was, you know, actually relevant to the overall story of Resident Evil, because like while the things that they were touching on, putting emphasis on this story was relevant to this game, it wasn't exactly relevant in like any later entry. I'm trying to skirt and skate around as many spoilers as possible if you couldn't tell, but you know, it's like, it's a good game. I enjoy it. It's just one of those games where I'm like, was it really necessary? Like, I feel like on its own, sure, I mean, it does help explain some things, or at least give a little more context and background to it, but otherwise, I don't think it's a game that we necessarily needed. However, I am glad that we have it. I mean, if that wasn't obvious enough with it being in the A tier, like, I do love this game. But anyway, on to Resident Evil Dead Aim. You know what? I'm gonna put this in a B. I actually have a lot of fun with this one. It's one of those Resident Evil light gun games, and anybody that knows me knows I'm a sucker for light gun games. I had a lot of fun with this one. I've only beaten it once, but it's a great time. Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak File 2. Those are also gonna go into the B tier for me. They're fun games. They released on the PS2, and their main focus was on like multiplayer / co-op gameplay. Not games I'd necessarily be rushing to return to. However, again, if I was to do like a full binge of the series, these are some entries that I'd genuinely be looking forward to playing. I had a lot of fun with them. Resident Evil Deadly Silence is gonna go, ooh, do I put it in the S tier? I think it deserves the S tier. It's literally just a remake of the original game, but on the DS, and they did it so well. I never thought that they'd be able to so perfectly adapt the original Resident Evil to a DS, but when I got my hands on this port back in the day, it was just... My mind was blown. It's a little expensive nowadays, so if you have a copy, definitely make sure you hold on to that baby close, because if you lose it or if you sell it, it's gonna cost you a pretty penny to get it back. However you manage to get your hands on this game, or however you manage to play it, it's definitely worth a playthrough. It's honestly astonishing, and if you can do it on original hardware, that's even better. Resident Evil 4 is gonna go into the S tier. I mean, to talk about it would literally be wasting my breath. We all know why Resident Evil 4 is in the S tier. In fact, I'm just gonna make it known and put it in the top of the S tier, because Resident Evil 4 is my favorite video game of all time. Again, we all know why it's amazing. It's S tier. Literally one of the best games ever made. And again, in my opinion, it's literally my favorite game of all time. Resident Evil 5. I want to put it in the S tier, but if I'm gonna be honest and truthful with myself, I think it deserves to go in the A tier. It's an amazing game. I have a lot of fun with it, and it's one that I actually want to replay relatively soon. However, Sheva, can you stop using all of my herbs? Please, just for one moment. I was trying to say that. Do you have to use all of my heals? That is literally my only gripe with it. Well, there's a few other gripes. Like, one of the main ones being that it tried to be Resident Evil 4, but it tried to do it a little too hard at certain points, and therefore in certain areas it kind of loses its identity in trying to chase that original Resident Evil 4 vibe. In only a very few couple instances, though. Otherwise, again, it's an absolutely amazing game, but one of the things that holds it back for me, like, the co-op mechanic is cool, and most of the time Chef is great, but I can't tell you how many times I had to loot up, like, every single thing in the environment just to make sure I was good on heals, because I had to account for all the times that Sheva was going to be wasting mine. While I like the bosses and encounters in this game, there wasn't as many that, like, stuck with me long term. Like, I could think of a few, like the one on the ship, and then the El Gigante when you're in the back with the turrets, and you got the encounter with Jill and Wesker at the end, and, you know, you're punching boulders and all that, but overall, the encounters themselves just didn't stick with me, like, as well as the ones in the S tier did, for example. Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D is going to go into the B. It was essentially just the Mercenaries mode ported to the 3DS. It was a really fun game, but again, it's just Mercenaries, so there's not a whole lot to say about it. It was just a good time. I'm gonna rank these both together just because, I mean, they kind of go together. Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside. Ooh, okay. You know what? Compared to the other Resident Evil games, like, I have a lot of fun with these, and I genuinely love replaying these often, but, you know, if I'm gonna be honest with myself, I don't know if they necessarily deserve to go into the A tier. That being said, they're a freaking blast. They're more light gun Resident Evil games, and if you haven't played them, again, however you can manage to get your hands on these, I highly recommend them, especially if you can get it on original hardware. Umbrella Chronicles doesn't go for as much nowadays, however, Darkside Chronicles is a bit more expensive. Maybe it's just because I grew up when arcades were still around and they were still really popular, but I'm a sucker for those things, like the Jurassic Park game, the one Terminator game that they had at, like, movie theaters and arcades sometimes. I'm just a sucker for games like that. Resident Evil Revelations is gonna go into the A tier. And you know what, while I'm thinking of it, I think I'm gonna drop Resident Evil 0 down to a B. Again, I really love this game, but if I'm gonna be honest with myself, I think that does deserve the B tier. But anyway, back to Resident Evil Revelations. The fact that they made this work on a 3DS still boggles my mind to that. How did they do that? It's essentially like classic Resident Evil, you know, a strong emphasis on that atmosphere and the story. However, it has the camera perspective of RE4. Towards the end, it definitely picks up on the action side a bit more, but just through and through, it's an absolutely amazing game. And whether you play it on a 3DS or you play the console ports, that's another one that I feel like goes below the radar way too much and deserves way more attention. Picking up the pace towards the end here, Resident Evil 6 is going to go into the A tier. I thoroughly enjoy this game, and it kind of sucks that this game gets so much hate because for what it is, like for me, when it comes to games, I compare games to themselves. I just review games and look at them for what they are. I don't compare it to anything else in the series. I just look at that game for what it is. I don't care what it was going for, what came before it, what came after it. I look at that game. Is it fun? And if the answer to that is yes, then I'm probably gonna like it, regardless of what the title is or what series it's a part of. As long as the game is fun and I enjoy it, then that's really all that matters, right? So with that being said, I'm gonna keep it in the A tier. I thoroughly enjoy Resident Evil 6, and it's literally like 4 games in one. There's like 4 different campaigns you can play through, and each of those campaigns is the length of like a normal Resident Evil campaign. It's honestly amazing. And none of them are like copy and paste. Like sure, there's a few overlapping sections where like characters meet, but otherwise it's like all original content. It's insane. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is gonna go in the A tier. It just did what Revelations 1 did, but kind of like ooped up the spooky and creepy atmosphere, and I honestly really loved Revelations 2. This is one that I've replayed multiple times. This is one of my favorite Resident Evil games. In fact, I'm going to put it in the S tier. I love Revelations 2 that much. This was also when Resident Evil was trying to do like the episodic format back when like Telltale games were really popular. For one part of an episode, you'll be playing as one character. For the other half of the episode, you'll be playing as another character with a separate story, and it's honestly a really cool game. Again, not as many people played this one, so I don't want to go too deep into the spoiler territory, but if you haven't played it before, please do. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, can I even put it in a B? Honestly, the plot and the story in this game is really cool, and there was so much potential there. However, it didn't exactly live up to that potential 100%, so I think it honestly does deserve a C tier. Like, I thoroughly enjoy the game, and a part of me really does want to put it in the B, but if I'm being honest with myself, in the grand scheme of Resident Evil and all the other games, especially compared to the ones that are in the B tier, like Umbrella Chronicles, Resident Evil 0, Outbreak, etc., I think it does deserve the C tier, and while we're talking about that, I'll go ahead and rank another decisive one, that being Umbrella Corps. Again, it's another game that I have a lot of fun with, and I do want to put it in B just because I have that much fun with this game, and I do thoroughly enjoy it that much. However, if I'm being honest with myself, in terms of the content that is on offer here, and when I think about the package as a whole, it's just like, it definitely doesn't, you know, it doesn't hold up as well compared to the other ones in the B tier, so I think this one's gonna have to stay in a C with Operation Raccoon City. Again, remember, Resident Evil is literally my favorite franchise of all time. I've played all of the games in the series that have released in North America. In fact, I've actually played more than the games that were released in North America because I have played some of the versions that were released in Japan. That being said, I still love all of these games, and even if they're in the C tier, I still love them to death. However, if I'm being honest with myself, I know that, you know, Umbrella Corps doesn't hold a candle to Resident Evil 2. Let's be honest here. While we're talking about Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 2 is going to go into the S tier. It just took everything that made the original, well, amazing, and then it just remade it, brought it up to modern hardware, and it's honestly one of the best remakes of all time. While we're talking about remakes, let's go ahead and rank Resident Evil 3, which I think I'm going to put it in an A. You know, I was thinking about this, like, does it deserve an S? However, I don't know if I can truthfully put it in the S. I do believe that it deserves an A at the very least, though. Like, I enjoyed the game. It sucks that some of the content got cut. It also sucks that they took out, like, the branching paths things, and the fact that Nemesis felt more scripted than before. Like, sure, he was kind of scripted before, but I don't know, it felt more scripted here. It felt like more on rails every time that you did encounter him, outside of a few boss fights where you had some control. However, I still love this game, and I'm glad that it exists, and it is one that I have replayed several times since the time that it released, and I truthfully do love it. It's just, you know, I don't think it necessarily deserves the S tier and, you know, to be ranked among Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4 and such, but it does definitely at least deserve the A tier. Resident Evil 7, I feel like this was another one that was just so popular that I literally don't even need to explain why it deserves the S tier. It's so great. The only part of the game that really kind of, like, I don't know, it just kind of messes with the tone or the pacing a bit would be like the ship part. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion or not. It's just, I don't know, I didn't really enjoy the ship part as much, but outside of that, I love Resident Evil 7 so much. Played it multiple times, and just that whole beginning, like, half of the game in the house, and when you're, like, going outside with the RV and all that, it's just, that whole area, that whole opening area of the game, it's so good. I still don't know what they did to my boy Chris at the end, but thankfully they fixed it for Resident Evil Village, which is also gonna go in the S tier. I know this one's probably a hot take, but I really loved Resident Evil Village. One of my favorite parts in this game, I don't want to spoil it just in case you haven't played it, but a certain character makes a reference back to a moment from Resident Evil 5, and it was executed so perfectly. The way I see Village, it's kind of like Resident Evil 4, but in first person. It tries to keep the spooky elements for Resident Evil 7 while, like, you know, boosting up the action a bit, making things a bit more intense in the same way that Resident Evil 4 did, where it tried to, again, try to keep some of the horror elements while putting some more focus on the action. And who can forget when the whole internet was losing their minds over Lady D? I just realized I'm gonna have to change the F tier to a haven't played tier, because honestly, none of these games go into the F tier for me. However, there are a few that I haven't played. That being said, Resident Evil Reverse, I have not played that one. Resident Evil 4 VR, I have not played that one. Resistance, that's gonna go into a C tier for me. It was alright, but it honestly didn't leave much of an impact on me, and in fact, it left so little of an impact for me that I didn't even check out Reverse when that did that even come out? I'm not sure. That just leaves RE4 Remake, and I'm just gonna say now, RE4 Remake is tied with the original Resident Evil 4 as my favorite games of all time. It is quite literally the perfect remake. It took everything that made RE4 so amazing and just remade it. I won't talk about this game too much just because, you know, it just came out and spoilers and all that. But if you haven't played the RE4 Remake, please do yourself a favor and play it. But anyway, that's my ranking of the Resident Evil games. Now I definitely want to hear from you guys down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Whatever you're thinking, I'd love to hear from you guys. But anyway, as always, a shout out to the patrons and channel members: Karma's Fake Grandma, Liberty Tab, Big Daddy, Manny, Lupasaurus Rex, Razak, Polar, Ray, to Webster, Lamas, Bianca, Spurgatory, Dripping Son, Mela, Last King, Community Management, Mason, Irvin, Teacher Y15, Flame 71, Aaron Reynolds, and Unknown. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. And remember, don't go hollow. Peace.